We're now going to switch from taking an equation and graphing it to taking information about a graph and making the equation. In order to make an equation, you want to put your equation into slope y-intercept, which is y equals mx plus b. So the two things you need to know in order to be able to make an equation is what is the slope, which is the m, and what is the y-intercept, which is the b. So remember that m is the slope, and remember that b is the y-intercept. And of course, the other thing you need to remember is the formula for slope is y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1, or you can say it's rise over run. Now, when you make an equation, what you always want to do is always have the y and always have the x in the equation, and then all you have to do is substitute in the value of m and substitute in the value of b. So in this question, what is the equation of a line with a slope of -2/3 and a y-intercept of 4? So your slope is -2/3. And then your y-intercept is 4, which is +4. So the y and the x variables don't get substituted for numbers in your final answer, but the m gets substituted for your slope and the b gets substituted for your y-intercept. So that is the most basic type of question you'll get, is what do you do if you are given the slope and given the y-intercept? There are other questions where you are not given the slope and you are not given the y-intercept. So for instance, you might be given a graph. You can take a look at the graph to find where the graph crosses the y-axis, and that would be your y-intercept. And then you can make a right triangle and calculate the slope by using the rise over the run. In other questions, they may give you the slope and they may give you a point, and that point is not the y-intercept. So in this example, what is the equation of a line with a slope of -1/2 passing through the point 4, -5? So remember, to find the equation of a line, you need to know the slope and the y-intercept. We know the slope is 1/2. What we don't know is the y-intercept. So the first thing you're going to do is to write out the equation, y equals mx plus b. And then you're going to substitute the slope into the m. So then it would be y equals, and the slope is -1/2 x plus b. So that's the first step, is to substitute the slope in for the m. The second step is to take the point and you're going to substitute that in for the x and the y. So the 4 gets substituted in for the x and the -5 gets substituted in for the y. And then we'll be able to solve for the b. So the y gets substituted in for -5 equals, the slope is -1/2. The x we're going to substitute in 4, and then plus b. So now what we have is an equation that we are going to solve for b. So to do that, first multiply the slope and that value of x. So -1/2 times 4 is equal to -2. You can use your calculator, or you can just say -1 times 4 is -4, and then divided by 2 is negative 2. So then negative 5 equals negative 2 plus b. And then now solve the equation for b. So to isolate b, you're going to add 2 to both sides. So add 2 to both sides. And then you get negative 5 plus 2 is negative 3, and that is equal to b. So when you go to make your equation, y equals, we know that the slope is negative 1/2 times x, and now we know the y-intercept is minus 3. Now in some cases, you aren't given the slope or the y-intercept. So in this example, you are given 2 points. So what is the equation of a line that passes through these 2 points? So first you have to figure out what the slope is to be able to substitute that in for m, and then you have to figure out what the y-intercept is to be able to substitute that in for b. The first step will be to determine the slope using the slope formula. So the first point is x1, y1, and the second point is x2, y2. So to determine the slope, you need the slope formula, y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. And when you put those little numbers in, please remember that they are subscripts, not superscripts, which means they go a little bit below the y, not up above the y. Some people are putting them up here and it makes them look like exponents. So y2 is 1, y1 is 2. So it's going to be 1 subtract 2 over x2 is negative 3. x1 is negative 6, so that's going to be negative 3 minus negative 6. And then 1 minus 2 is negative 1, and 3 subtract negative 6. Remember, when you subtract a negative, you actually get a positive, so it's negative 3 plus 6, which is 3. Now, this fraction is in lowest terms, but if it's not, please make sure you put it into lowest terms. So that is the slope, and that gets substituted into the equation. So the equation is y equals mx plus b, and we can now put that negative 1/3 in for the m. All right, now in order to figure out what the b is, it is now going to become a question just like what we did over here. So as soon as you find the slope using the slope formula, now you pick the point that's been given. In this question, we've been given 2 points, so you can pick either one. It doesn't matter which one. An idea would be to pick an x value that is a multiple of 3 so that you can get rid of the fractions. One idea might be to use whatever has less negatives, but they have the same number. But it's up to you which one you would prefer to use. We'll just pick the first one. So you pick a point, and you're going to substitute that in for x and y. So the 6 gets substituted in for the x, and the 2 gets substituted in for the y. So 2 equals negative 1/3 times the x value, which is negative 6, and then plus b. Now, multiply these two numbers together. So negative 1 over 3 times negative 6. So in your calculator or in your head, negative 1 times negative 6 is 6. And then divided by 3 is 2. So that's going to give you 2 equals 2 plus b. And the last step is to solve for b, which means to isolate b, we have to subtract 2 from both sides. And then now that makes b being equal to 0. So now what we're going to do is substitute the m and the b back into the equation. So that makes the equation y equals negative 1/3 x plus 0, but for communication, you're actually not going to write the 0 because it's not necessary. So it's just negative 1/3 x. So those are the cases that you're going to be looking at. You might be given the slope and the y-intercept. You might be given the slope and a point, or you might be given neither. So you need to be able to use your tools to solve for the slope and solve for the y-intercept if needed.